Americans for Fair Taxation presents the weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, May 15th, 2026. Federal excise taxes, the constitutional basis, origins, and use in the United States. The FAIRtax, a national retail sales tax, is an excise tax. Now, excise taxes have been used to fund federal government activities since the beginning of the Republic. Now, excise taxes are taxes that are imposed on goods, services, or activities rather than on income. The Internal Revenue Service describes them as taxes that can apply at different points in the chain of commerce, including importation, manufacture, retail sale, or final use. Today, they apply to items and activities such as motor fuels, aviation fuel, alcohol, tobacco, firearms and ammunition, certain environmental chemicals, and some corporate stock repurchases. The constitutional authority for federal excise taxes appears in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay debts and provide for the common defense and the general welfare. The same clause also requires that all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. That means federal excises must operate with geographic uniformity across the country. Now, unlike federal income taxes, excise taxes did not need the 16th Amendment for their existence. They were part of the Congress's original taxing power from the start. Federal excise taxes began very early in the Republic. In 1791, under President George Washington and at the urging of Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, Congress enacted the first nationwide internal revenue tax, an excise tax on distilled spirits, often called the whiskey tax. It was adopted to help service the national debt that followed the Revolution and quickly became one of the earliest major tests of federal power, leading to the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. The episode mattered not only for revenue, but also because it demonstrated that the new national government could enforce its tax laws. In the early 19th century, excise taxes rose and fell with fiscal need. According to the Congressional Research Service, internal excises were repealed in 1802, reintroduced during the War of 1812, repealed again after that war, and then restored on a much larger scale during the Civil War. After the Civil War, taxes on distilled spirits and tobacco remained especially important, and for decades, excise taxes accounted for a substantial share of federal revenue. Excises were later expanded again in wartime and in periods of fiscal stress, including the Spanish-American War and World War I, when Congress taxed a wider range of products and activities. Over time, however, excise taxes became a smaller part of the federal revenue system as the modern income and payroll taxes displaced them as the government's main revenue source. Congressional Research Service analysis explains that excise taxes now play a much smaller role than they did before the 20th century, even though Congress still uses them for targeted fiscal and regulatory purposes. The Congressional Budget Office reported that in fiscal year 2024, the federal government collected about $101 billion in excise taxes out of roughly $4.9 trillion in total federal revenues. That shows that excises remain meaningful but comparatively modest in the federal budget. Up to the present, federal excise taxes have been used in three main ways. First, they raise general revenue. Second, they function as user charges with certain taxes dedicated to related trust funds. For example, GAO explains that taxes on gasoline, diesel, tires, and certain truck-related activities support the Highway Trust Fund, while airline ticket and aviation fuel taxes support the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. Third, excises are often used to discourage or offset the social or environmental costs of products or conduct, such as tobacco use or pollution-producing chemicals. Current federal excise taxes reflect that mixed purpose. The IRS's current excise tax guidance shows continuing taxes on motor fuels and other transportation fuels, while recent IRS guidance also notes a 1% excise tax on certain corporate stock repurchases and the reinstatement of Superfund chemical excise taxes effective July 1, 2022. In conclusion, The FAIRtax, H.R. 25, is more than just a proposal for a retail sales tax. It's a fundamental restructuring of the federal fiscal structure. Unlike other excise taxes, which normally are applied to specific products and in different percentage amounts, the FAIRtax applies a 23% rate to all new retail products and retail services. The FAIRtax is the answer. The FAIRtax is a national retail sales tax on new retail goods and retail services. It provides a family credit so that all purchases up to the poverty level for each family are not taxed. There is no withholding from your paycheck, and you never have to file a tax return again telling the government how much you earned and how much you spent. Also, you'll never ever be harassed by the IRS ever again because the FAIRtax abolishes the IRS. Now, many of you have labored tirelessly for freedom from the federal income tax and the IRS. You deserve a great deal of credit for your efforts to educate the American people on the need to fund the American government in a way that's good for America and returns freedom to the American people. It's imperative, though, that we don't replace the current income tax and the IRS with an alternative system that could still be manipulated by the ruling elite. We must let Congress and the President know that the best way to replace the income tax and the IRS is with the FAIRtax. Now, make no mistake about it. The FAIRtax is a grave threat to the ruling elites. It will strip them of their power and their ability to control us through the tax system. Their opposition to the FAIRtax will be fierce and unrelenting. And don't think for an instant they won't use half-truths, deception, and downright lies in their desperate attempts to hang on to their power. However, with the support of this president, we can finally eliminate the income tax and the IRS. Of course, the best course of action is not only to repeal the income tax and abolish the IRS, but to repeal the 16th Amendment as well, so no future administration can ever shackle the American people with an income tax again. We must come together and ensure that real tax reform, the FAIRtax, is not subverted by the elites in D.C. This will take the diligent effort from all of us. We need your financial assistance, and we need your grassroots assistance. Now, if you have contacts that will allow us to get more information about the FAIRtax to President Trump, please let us know. Please email us at info@fairtax.org, and we'll give you some options on how you can best help us. At a minimum, please call your congressional representative and ask if he or she supports the FAIRtax. If so, thank him or her for their support and suggest they become a co-sponsor of H.R. 25 if they're not one already. If not, ask why not. Now, if your representative claims to be unfamiliar with the FAIRtax, offer to have someone come to their office and explain it to them. The solution? Pass the FAIRtax. Now, why would D.C. pass the FAIRtax and give up an almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. Isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to FAIRtax.org to invest in AFFT and help us pass the FAIRtax. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.